Hello and welcome to the commentary video for my all-females PB. Before we begin, I just want to make a quick note that there won't be any game audio in this VOD. Instead, I'll be playing some background music as I commentate. So, this is one of the 4 half game categories that were introduced in 2020, and essentially what you do is that you only complete 4 out of the 8 character stories. Since the categories are relatively new, not many people have run it, and there aren't a lot of resources out there for people to learn the category. So I hope this video can encourage more people to pick up half game categories. In my opinion, they are some of the better categories to run because they aren't as dependent on luck to get a good time as compared to single stories, and they are far less complex than full game categories like Galdera. So in this commentary, I'll do my best to explain the route and the menus. And with that being said, I hope you all enjoy this video. So the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna start with Hanit. And the reason why we start with Hanit is because she's gonna be the fastest character that we can start with to get to Evasive Maneuvers. And I'll explain later what Evasive Maneuvers is, but for now, the first thing we need to do is we need to go to the shop and we need to buy the wolf spell, which is going to give us more attack to kill Gizarma a lot quicker. The problem is that we don't have enough money, so we have to sell 2 olives first. And chapter 1s are kind of just an introduction to game mechanics, so here we are being introduced to path actions, which are how characters interact with NPCs in this game. Hanet's path action is Provoke, which allows her to bring NPCs into battle. For the purposes of the speedrun, this isn't going to be very useful, so the only times we're going to use Provoke is when we have to do Hanet's story. One thing about Provokes as well is that you can only use items and monsters that you capture. So Hanet has a special ability called Capture, which allows her to catch certain monsters and then use them in battle. This is a pretty cool mechanic, but unfortunately a lot of the monsters are not very strong and they take a lot of time to capture. So we aren't really going to be using Capture throughout the run. We are, however, going to be using it in chapter 1 because one of the monsters that we can capture in the next screen does a lot of damage for this part of the game. So you're gonna see me run from all the encounters. This is just because we don't need to kill any encounters. Killing encounters doesn't have any benefit in this run, so it's better to just run from them. It's not guaranteed that you run, however, so you can actually guarantee that you can escape by breaking the enemy. So if you notice, every enemy has a certain number of shields and weaknesses, and every time you hit an enemy for its weakness, their shields go down by 1, and when they have 0 shields, they become broken. So when an enemy is broken, they take more damage, and they lose all their moves on that turn and the following turn. So here I break the forest fox here because I want to capture it. And like I said, this fox is going to deal a lot of damage for the upcoming boss. The reason why I don't break all the encounters along the way is because it also takes some time to break them. So sometimes it's faster to just run. But of course you aren't guaranteed if you do that. So Gizarma here has a lot of HP, which is why we need to use the fox here to deal damage. And essentially what we're doing in this fight is that we're just lowering Gizarma's shields before we break it. So the battle system in this game revolves around 2 mechanics. The first is the break mechanic, which I've already explained. The second is the boost mechanic. So every character starts off the battle with 1 boost point or BP. And every end of the turn that they don't use a boost point, they gain 1 BP. And boost points can be used to increase the damage of your skills, like I'm doing here with True Strike. For certain attacks, they can also increase the number of hits, and for buffs and debuffs, they increase the duration. So, essentially what you want to do in this game is that you want to take advantage of your boost points to break the enemies, and also to deal as much damage as you can when the enemies are broken. So, that's Gizarma, and right after Chapter 1, what we are going to be doing is that we want to get a skill called Evasive Maneuvers. So Evasive Maneuvers is an essential skill for Octopath speedrunning because it increases the distance that we can travel before getting an encounter. And this is going to be very, very crucial because we need to go to higher level areas to get resources before we can proceed with the rest of the run. And with Evasive Maneuvers, that becomes possible. So the normal way to get Evasive Maneuvers is to recruit a Scholar character, because Evasive Maneuvers is a support skill of the Scholar class. So support skills are passive skills and you unlock them by learning base skills. Unfortunately, the Scholar character in this game is a male character, so we can't recruit him for this category. But what we can do is we can go to this place known as the Scholar Shrine, which is where you can unlock Scholar as a secondary job for your characters. So we'll be able to learn Evasive Maneuvers as long as we get the prerequisite job points or JP on Hanet if we go to the Merchant Shrine. So what you saw me do there is I killed an encounter. That's to give me enough JP to learn a skill known as Aerostorm. Aerostorm is a skill that hits every enemy at least 3 times. And I'm gonna want that because I'm gonna be looking for a special encounter known as a Kate. Kates are rare encounters that spawn at about a 3% rate after your chapter once, and they give a lot of JP. So by killing a Kate, you can get enough JP to get Evasive Maneuvers. So I'm only looking for a Kate because I'm trying to get a very optimized time. There are other ways to get enough JP if you don't want to hunt for a Kate. So for example, if you're just learning the route, you can definitely go for the other option, which is what I would recommend, and also what you would do in a marathon, because obviously looking for Kates which are a 3% encounter isn't exactly the best option for a marathon. And also because Kates have 4 HP and they each hit of Aerostorm is only going to deal 1 damage to it. You're gonna need at least 4 hits, which isn't guaranteed on Aerostorm or Rain of Arrows, which is the other skill you can use to kill the Kate. So Hanet doesn't have the best time looking for Kates. That's what I'm trying to say here. But if you're trying to get a very optimized time, then looking for a Kate is probably ideal. The other option, if you're not looking for a Kate, is to go to a place known as the Whistlewood. This is a higher level area with encounters that give a lot of JP. So by going there and killing an encounter there, you can sometimes get enough JP for Evasive Maneuvers. So here I finally find the Kate, and here's where Aerostorm does help because Rain of Arrows hits random targets. It's essentially the same as Aerostorm, except it hits random targets instead of all the targets. So in this encounter here, which has 2 enemies, using Aerostorm means that I'll be able to guarantee at least 3 hits on the Kate. And fortunately for me, I do get 4 hits, so I was able to kill the Kate. And now I have enough job points to get Evasive Maneuvers. So going to the Scholar Shrine, we're going to provoke this NPC here. So this is pretty much the only relevant use of provoke outside of Hanet's chapters. It's to reset the step counter. So every time you go into a battle and then you flee from it, it actually resets your step counter, so you won't get an encounter afterwards. Otherwise, if you try to go to the Scholar Shrine normally, there's a very high chance you get an encounter. And since you're pretty low level now, you don't want to get the encounter because it has a very high chance of killing you. So by using Provoke, we can make it to the Scholar Shrine very safely, and now we can unlock Scholar for Hanet. So we can learn 2 skills right now, and that unlocks Evasive Maneuvers. So we're all set for this next section of the run, which is Exploration. So before we actually start to recruit characters, we want to embark on some exploration because this is gonna give us the resources to be able to rush a lot of these bosses. And what I'm doing here is that I'm tagging some towns as well, because in this game you can fast travel back to any town that you've previously visited. So I tag Noble Court there because I'm gonna need to go back there later. And now we're just gonna head over to some higher level areas for resources. And along the way, we're gonna be tagging a few towns as well. So I've already tagged Noble Court. The next place I'm gonna go to is Riptide. Riptide is where we're going to pick up Tressa later. And Tressa is going to be a very important character for this run because she is going to allow us to purchase items from NPCs. So Tressa's path action is purchase, and this allows us to buy items from NPCs as long as we have enough money. So by going on exploration, we accomplish a few things, right? We get the resources that we need to rush these early chapters, and we also get enough money to purchase items and also to use a skill known as Hired Help. So Hired Help is a skill that you pay money in order to deal damage, and it's a skill of the Merchant class, which is also Tressa's base class. The nice thing about Hired Help is that not only can you use it to break a lot of enemies because it has quite a few weapon types, but the highest tier of Hired Help, which is Veterans, deals a lot of damage and is actually going to be the main source of damage in this run. So the nice thing about Hired Help Veterans is that the damage it deals is not dependent on your stats. So in this category where our characters are pretty low level and don't get very strong, using Hired Help is going to be able to bypass that restriction. The only issue with Veterans is that it takes 30,000 leaves per use, so that's also one of the main reasons why we need to do exploration. So another thing that we do in exploration is we also get more shrines. So I already explained the Merchant Shrine, the Merchant class, so we definitely want to get the Merchant Shrine as well, so we can have access to 2 sources of Hired Help on our team. And here we pick up the Warrior Shrine, which is not going to be relevant now, but when it does come up, I'll try to explain it. And the next place that we're going to tag is a town known as Stoneguard. This is where Hanet's Chapter 2 is going to take place. So the first time you enter a town and you can start a Chapter 2 or another chapter, the game will automatically prompt you to start it. And you want to start it as soon as you enter the town, because if you were to decline and you want to start it again later, you have to go all the way to the tavern to do it. So that's why we start it right now. But the good thing is we don't have to complete it now. We can just leave, which is what we do because we aren't as strong yet. And we aren't strong enough to complete it yet. So what you saw me do there is I saved at a save point. And this is because this screen is pretty long, so if I die here, I will just respawn at the save point. And here you're gonna see me do something a bit strange. I'm gonna save at the save point and I'm gonna quit and then reload my save file. And the reason for that is even though we have Evasive Maneuvers, this screen right here, Moonstruck Host, if we want to go from the entrance to the Merchant Shrine, we are almost always going to get an encounter because the screen is very long. So what we do there is that we save and reload save file because that resets the step counter as well, similar to provoking an NPC. And now we can pick up the Merchant Shrine. So the nice thing about this category is that because Tressa is a female character, you can have access to 2 merchants in your party. This isn't the case for other half-game categories like males and rogues because Tressa is neither a male or a rogue character. So in those categories, you only have access to 1 merchant. So half-game categories are pretty interesting in that regard, that every category is different because you have different characters and different half actions. So definitely a very cool set of categories to run. I would definitely say females are one of the easier half game categories to run. So definitely a good place to start out. So we're gonna tag Goldshore here because we need to come back here later. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna provoke this NPC here because this screen is pretty long and sometimes you get an encounter, so I choose to provoke him to make it a lot safer to pass the screen. So if you provoke this guy, you will never get an encounter here. The other option is to just run to the end of the screen and then essentially what we need to do is that we need to pick up these items near the entrance. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually getting the items and then provoking the NPCs. The other option is to just run to the end of the screen, get the items, and then run back to the previous screen and get the other item, which is actually slightly faster than provoking. But I choose to do the provoke because it's a lot safer. So for example, that Goldshore screen, if you ran all the way to the end, there's a chance you can get an encounter, and on this screen as well, going to the save point, you can also get an encounter. So by doing the provokes, you eliminate both those chances. And here I'm going to do another save and quit because I'm going to need to get this Thunder Soulstone here at the bottom. And then I'm going to need to run to Grandport. And Grandport here, there's a chance of getting an encounter on the way to Grandport. And because this is a level 45 danger level area, if we get an encounter here, it basically means that most of the times we're going to die. So once we tag Grandport, we go to this next area called Lock of the Lost King. So the reason why we go here is because there's a lot of money here and another soulstone. So soulstones are consumable items which deal a fixed amount of damage to your opponent. So they come in 3 tiers, the small, medium, and large soulstones. And the larger the soulstone is, the more damage they deal. And soulstones are very useful because they deal a fixed amount of damage, so your characters who are very weak can use soulstones to accommodate for the fact that they don't have enough damage. And soulstones are going to be how we recruit characters because a lot of the bosses, Chapter 1 bosses, don't have a lot of HP, so they die to a few stones. So once we're done looting Lock of the Lost King, we have enough stones to pick up a few characters. So the first character that we're going to pick up is Ophelia. This is because if we do it in a different order, we're going to need more stones to pick up the boss, to kill the bosses, because their HP scales with how many characters you have. So the first 2 characters we want to pick up are Ophelia and Tressa. And if you were to do Ophelia first, you would only need 1 large soulstone and 1 medium soulstone. And then Tressa, you can use 1 large soulstone. If you do it the other way though, you're going to need 2 medium soulstones if you do Ophelia third. And the reason for this is because if you hit an enemy for its weakness, you deal 30% more damage. So by using the stone here that hits for Guardian's weaknesses, you can deal a lot more damage than if you were to use a stone that didn't hit for its weakness. And this is also the reason why Mick and Mac, who is Tressa's Chapter 1 boss, is only going to take 1 stone even if you were recruiting her at 2 or 3 characters. So if you were to recruit Tressa as your second character, you can use any soulstone, large soulstone to kill Mick and Mac. If you recruited her as your third character, you can use a wind soulstone which would deal enough damage for both bosses. For both Mick and Mac. So once we're done recruiting Ophi, now we recruit Tressa. So like I said, we want to recruit Tressa as early as possible because she brings a lot of utility to the speedrun and we want to take advantage of that as early as possible. Another reason why we want to recruit Tressa as quickly as possible is because of her passive ability, which is called Eye for Money. So Eye for Money is a skill that lets Tressa pick up money every time she walks around the screen where you can get an encounter. And in the lower level areas, this is not going to make that big of a difference. But in the higher level area, she's going to start generating a lot of money. So because we're going to go to some higher level areas very shortly, we want to pick up Tressa first. And you're going to see here as I go into the next screen, at the top left hand of the menu, top left hand corner of the menu, it's going to say that Tressa has picked up a certain amount of money. So this is Eye for Money coming into play. And again, in a lower level area like this, it's not going to be a lot of money. But later, it's going to be in the thousands. So we're making our way over to Mecha Mac. And we're going to use the Wind Soulstone that we picked up from Grandport to take them both out in one hit. So you can really see the power of soulstones here. Large soulstones especially deal a lot of damage. So they allow us to pick up our characters a lot quicker than if we were to do it the casual way, which is to break them and kill them with attacks. And again, this is only made possible by the fact that we have Evasive Maneuvers, which allowed us to go into higher level areas to get all these resources, because large soulstones like this can only be found in higher level areas. So one thing about Tressa Chapter 1 is completing it also puts us outside the screen, outside the town and quite far out into the town. So by going to the next screen from there, you can actually minimize the chances of you getting an encounter. So the next place we want to go to is to tag a town known as Sunshade, because this is where we're going to pick up our next character. But we're not going to pick her up yet, because we just use up all our soulstones, and now we want to pick up more soulstones and do more exploration before we finally decide to pick her up. So completing Tressa's Chapter 1 actually gives you a medium soulstone. Medium soulstones are useful for dealing damage to bosses and also for killing random encounters. So I got an encounter there which was kind of unlucky. It's not the most likely encounter, but it's not like a minuscule chance either. So I did decide to use the medium soulstone there to kill that encounter, because with a larger group, if you fail to run from an encounter, it's a lot slower because you have to wait until the next turn to try again, basically. And in this route, we have access to a few backup medium soulstones, so if we use some early on, we can pick some up later. So we tag Sunshade, and now we're going to go to Query Quest, which is Tressa's Chapter 2 town. And like Haunted, we're not going to complete Tressa's Chapter 2 immediately, we're just going to start it and then leave. The reason is, again, like I said, we want to start the Chapter 2 when we enter the town. But we also want to go to Query Quest because we can pick up quite a few resources there, like soulstones. So that's going to be pretty useful. I'm getting a lot of random encounters here, which is pretty unfortunate. This screen is pretty long, so you usually get an encounter here, so I'm not too upset about this screen. But I believe I also get an encounter on this screen, so on the way to Query Quest on this screen, it's very unlikely, it's extremely unlikely to get an encounter here. So after I got this encounter, I was pretty tilted. But the good thing is, for both of these encounters, I do surprise it. So if you surprise or preemptive an enemy, it's kind of like in Final Fantasy. So you are able to escape from the encounter immediately. So now we reached Query Quest, we are going to start Tressa's Chapter 2. And again, there are quite a few soulstones here that we can pick up, so while we are here doing Tressa's Chapter 2, it's a good opportunity to pick up a few more resources that we're gonna need later. So the nature of half-game categories, it's the nature of half-game categories that they're a lot more resource intensive than, for example, a single story or even a full game category. Because for single stories, you have access to a lot of places where you can get the money needed. As compared to a half game category, because there are a lot more bosses, you are going to need a lot more money and soulstones, for example, to kill bosses. And even though full game categories are a lot longer, you have sources of damage that are not dependent on how much money you have. Like for example, in Galdera and all main stories, you get the Sorcerer class, which allows you to replace having to use veterans. And soulstones as well. But in this category, because it's not feasible to do that, you have to rely on mainly veterans and other sources of damage like soulstones. So it's a lot more resource intensive than other categories. So that was one of the challenges that I faced when routing the half game categories. So speaking of resources, we are going to pick up an item that is going to save us a lot of resources later on. So what I did in Query Quest was that actually at the end of the screen, after I did the final purchase for Tressa's story, I actually warped over to Stoneguard to continue with the rest of my exploration. And the reason for that is the next part of Tressa's Chapter 2 is actually on the first screen. And because I was on the end of the second screen, it's very slow if I were to run all the way back to the first screen. So what I do is I warp over to another place where I have something else to do. That way when I warp back to Query Quest, I'm on the first screen. And that is a lot more efficient. That's a lot more efficient way to do things. And you're gonna see quite a bit of it in this run. And I go over the Stoneguard here because it's the closest to this place known as Everhold, which we're going to attack for later. And then while we're in the area, we're also going to go to this place known as Everhold Tunnels. So if you're familiar with like other half game categories or full game categories, you definitely will recognize this area, Everhold Tunnels. It's a very high level area, and there are some very good pieces of equipment here. The problem with Everhold Tunnels is that it's a really long screen and there is a chance that you can die here. But fortunately, I do not get the encounter here, which is nice. And what you saw me do was that I actually went to the end of the screen where there was an optional boss, and before you face the optional boss, the game will ask you if you're ready. But if you say no, you actually reset your step counter, so that is exactly what I did. And the reason why we come to Everhold Tunnels, apart from the fact that there is a lot of money here, is for this weapon known as the Death Cleaver. So the Death Cleaver is one of the strongest axes in the game, and combined with a skill known as Amputation, which is a very strong axe skill of the Apothecary class, we're going to be able to deal a lot of damage with this Death Cleaver. And essentially what it does is that it saves us a lot of it saves us from having to use a lot of stones, which we would otherwise have to use to deal the damage required to beat some of these bosses. So by using the Death Cleaver here, we can save a lot of stones throughout the run. So it's totally worth it to go to Everhold Tunnels just to get the Death Cleaver. So this next area here is Marceline. We want to come here because there's quite a bit of nice stuff to pick up here. So the first thing we picked up was a soulstone there, and then we reset the step counter over at Marceline Catacombs so that we can go to Marceline without an encounter. And over in Marceline, we're going to be purchasing a few items with Tressa. The first thing we're going to purchase is Pomegranates. Pomegranates are items that give BP to your characters, so instead of having to wait turns to get BP, you can give them instantly with Pomegranates. And we're also going to be purchasing a few large soulstones from one of the NPCs here. And one of the main reasons why you also come to Marceline is because there are two pieces of armor here that you can just pick up from the chest here. The High House's armor and the Enchanted Circlet. And these are going to be pretty useful because they're going to give a lot of bulk to our otherwise very squishy characters. And allow them to survive attacks that they would otherwise not be able to survive. So the last place we need to go to before we pick up our final character is the Thief Shrine here. The reason why we need to get the Thief Shrine is because it has a very important debuff known as Armor Corrosive. Armor Corrosive is a debuff which lowers the which increases physical damage dealt to your opponents by 1.5 times. And this is very important because even though Hired Help Veterans doesn't take into account your stats, it is affected by Armor Corrosive, which is why it's so important to get Armor Corrosive. It essentially allows you to deal a lot more damage with the same amount of money. And this allows us to stretch out your money a lot more. And we have to get the Thief Shrine because the Thief character in this game, Therion, is also a male character. So this is the final character that we pick up, Primrose. And we pick her up we pick her up last because she doesn't really offer anything in terms of exploration, and we want to take advantage of the fact that finishing her chapter 1 puts us outside of her town. And then we can run to the next place that we need to go to from there. I run into an encounter here and I failed to run from it twice, which is pretty unfortunate and very slow. So I'm gonna lose quite a bit of time here. So as you can see, I lost about 50 seconds on this split alone just because I got so many encounters. But we're still ahead of our PB at this point, so I'm not feeling too worried. And like I said, finishing Prim's Chapter 1 puts us outside of Sunshade, so we can run to this next area here where we can get the Apothecary Shrine, which I mentioned before. So the main reason why we want to get the Apothecary class is so we can deal a lot of damage with amputation. Another reason is because it's gonna give us a passive skill later known as Hale and Hardy, which increases our character's HP. And this is actually going to be crucial for one of our boss setups. So the next chapter we want to do is Ophelia's Chapter 2. We're going to be rushing a lot of Ophelia's chapters first because her bosses are pretty easy to kill. And the later chapter bosses, like Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 bosses, give a lot of JP. And we're going to want to get as much JP as possible for as early as possible, because it's gonna allow us to unlock a lot more useful skills, which we can use for the rest of the run. So one of the main skills that we want to rush to in this run is called Snatch. And Snatch is a passive skill of the Thief Job class, And what Snatch does is that it allows us to steal and collect twice the amount of resources, so money or items, than we normally do. So I haven't mentioned Collect, it's one of the merchant skills. Collect allows us to get money off of bosses. So certain bosses you can collect and steal from, but certain bosses you can't. And so the speedrun is kind of structured in a way that we put a lot of bosses that we can collect for a lot of money later in the run. And then we put bosses that we can't collect early in the run. Or aren't worth collecting. And Ophelia's Chapter 4 boss happens to be a boss that we cannot collect. So on top of being pretty easy to kill, we also can't collect from him, so it makes sense to do him first. I run into in this encounter here. Normally I would kill it with an Hellstone, but this encounter can be killed with a Shadow M, which is why I decide to kill it with the Shadow M here. So throughout this run, I'm actually going to have to save a certain number of large soulstones. Because we actually don't pick up enough large soulstones in this run because they're so limited. So we're going to be depending on a certain passive skill called Endless Items to save soulstones. Endless Items is a support skill which has gives you a 25% chance of duplicating an item when you use it. So it's almost it's as if like you never used that item at all. So we're gonna try to save soulstones with endless items, and that allows us to save a lot of time having to make detours to get extra soulstones. But if you don't get enough endless items procs in this run, it doesn't kill the run. You just have to you just have to spend a bit more time and go to get extra backup stones. So I killed 2 encounters in this chapter because I want enough JP to learn my first bunch of skills. So I gave Hanet the Apothecary class and then Amputation. And then I gave Prim the Merchant class, so we have 2 merchants now. And Ophelia is gonna get the Thief class because because we need Armor Corrosive for the bosses. And you're gonna see how strong Hired Help Veterans is. This is the first time we're gonna use Hired Help Veterans, and Horavnir has about 35,000 HP. So we're gonna use Amputation here to deal some nice damage. And we're gonna collect the boss here because we have 2 merchants and we only need 1 merchant to use vets, so the other merchant can just collect a bunch of money for free. And Hired Help Veterans there does about 28,000 damage, so that's a lot of damage. So you can already see how strong Hired Help Veterans is, and Amputation as well. So the Death Cleaver there, putting in a lot of work. If you didn't have Amputation with the Death Cleaver, you would have to use stones to deal that remaining damage. So we're going to start Ophelia Chapter 3 here. We're going to start it first, but we're only going to complete it later. The reason why we want to come here first is to pick up this item known as the Empowering Bracelet. The Empowering Bracelet is an accessory which increases your max HP by 500. So this is going to give some of our characters a lot more HP to tank some attacks, which is going to be very helpful. And normally the way to get Empowering Bracelets is to scrutinize an NPC in Saintsbridge, which would unlock Empowering Bracelets as an item in the shop. So scrutinize allows you to... Scrutinize is a path action that allows you to interrogate information from NPCs, so this information can give you extra items or can be used to complete quests or can unlock extra items in shops. And the problem with Scrutinize is that it's Cyrus's pop action, so Cyrus is the scholar class of this game, so we cannot recruit Cyrus because he's a male character, so we don't have access to Scrutinize. So that means that HP items are pretty limited in this category, so we have to make do with the few that we can find. Fortunately, there are enough to go around. And that's also the reason why we have to get the Apothecary class, because so instead of using bracelets, we can get the support class support skill Hail and Hardy for the HP. So similar to in Tressa 2, now we go over to somewhere else because we have to run back to the first screen after that cutscene in the church. So now we do like other things. So we go to Grandport here because there's a lot of money and some resources that we want to pick up, like Pomegranates. And then we go to Noble Court here because there's another bracelet here that we want to pick up. I believe there are only 2 bracelets that you can pick up easily from NPCs, so we get both of them. And now we head over to this area known as the Forest of Purgation because there's while we're in Noble Court, we can it's very near Noble Court. So while we're in Noble Court, we can just go over to the Forest of Purgation once we're done purchasing the bracelet, and we can pick up some nice money and soulstones along the way. So once we're done with that, we're gonna go over to Stillsnow to complete Primrose's Chapter 2. So we're gonna run there from Svarky, which is the closest town that we have. So Stillsnow is gonna be where you can pick up extra M stones that you might have used earlier in the run. So I believe I used 1 extra M stone so far, so I'm gonna pick up 1 extra M stone in Stillsnow. You can use up to 3. So if you get like a lot of random encounters, you can use up to 3. And then you can pick up 2 backup stones in Stillsnow and then 1 in Goldshore. So this screen here, Victor's Hollow, you can run all the way from the start to Victor's Hollow here. The problem is that sometimes it does get you an encounter. So you can choose to reload your step counter at the top screen before going to Victor's Hollow. By doing that, it takes about 15 more seconds. I choose to run to Victor's Hollow because our party, because the encounter here is always the same, and our party is able to break the encounter easily. So even if I do get it, it's not that big of a deal. So for reference, that encounter can be broken with bandits, which you have 2 merchants for. And now we're going to make our way over to Stillsnow. We're going to reset our step counter at this screen here because the map is very long. So you're usually going to get an encounter if you go to Stillsnow from the start. So I also purchased a Nourishing Nut from the Man of Victor's Hollow. And what nuts is that they are consumable items which permanently increase the stats of your characters. So Nourishing Nut increases your maximum HP. So it's kind of like the Empowering Bracelet, but it doesn't increase it as much. But we don't need all that HP. And this is the only nut that we're gonna get in this route because we just need that 1 Nourishing Nut for the extra HP. And it's gonna be relevant for, I think, like 1 or 2 fights. But it's definitely worth it to pick that up. Because what it's gonna do is it's gonna allow Tressa to survive attacks which otherwise she cannot survive. So I picked up the extra Shadow M there because, like I said, I used 1 earlier in this run. And now we're gonna make our way over to Rufus. In this next menu here, I'm gonna give Hanet the Warrior class, and I'm gonna give her Spearhead and another Warrior skill. So we give Hanet the Warrior class just for this fight because she's gonna need Spearhead to deal enough hits to Rufus to break him. He has a lot of shields and he's weak to spear. So Spearhead does 1 hit of spear and then it puts you at the start of the next turn. So by using Spearhead and then spear on the next turn, you can break Rufus before he does anything. And I also equip endless items and a support skill known as Cover on Hanet. So Hanet Cover is a support skill of the Warrior class. And what it does is that when a character is below 30 HP and they were to take another physical attack, the character with cover would take it for them. So this is very useful because we don't have enough resources and items to guarantee that everyone lives every hit. So what we can do is protect our characters with other characters if they were to get focused down with attacks. So with the extra HP from the nuts and the empowering bracelets, this fight is pretty easy. I used mercenaries at the start of the fight because one of the merchants has a dead turn, and then you can use mercenaries to increase your defense. So Rufus here is actually a range with 1 M stone and 1 veterans. Yeah, I don't hit the range, but fortunately, Hanet has a pretty strong axe, so you can just use it to deal the remaining damage. I believe it's like a 50-50 if you hit that range, but you don't lose it. You don't lose much from missing that range. You just lose like a few seconds. And the next place that I go to is this area known as Maw of the Ice Dragon. So the reason why we go here is to pick up money and soulstones like any other place you go for exploration. The reason why we go here now is that we are in the area, and right after Primrose's Chapter 2, we are in Still Snow. So it's very convenient that we can just go there, come here from there. So now we're done with Rufus, we can go back to Ophelia Chapter 3. And there's a chest beside the tavern which you can pick up an M stone from if you use like extra M stones before this. So the extra bulk is also useful for this screen because sometimes you get an encounter here and you can't kill it, so you have to try to break it and run, or just try to run. So the extra HP does give you some extra bulk to break these enemies if you want to. And then on the second screen, we do a save and quit because we want to avoid the encounter here. You can actually still get an encounter on the way to the boss from the save point, so if you're unlucky, sometimes you do get an encounter. But the good thing is, even if you die, you just reload at the save point, so it doesn't actually lose you that much time. And that's kind of the nice thing about this game. There are a lot of save points and auto-save points. Every time you go into a new screen, it auto-saves the game. So even if you die and you didn't like save at a manual save point, you can just you just reload at the previous screen. So for this fight, you want to use Armor Corrosive on Shady Figure first because he has more HP. So by putting Armor Corrosive on here first, you get more damage out of this bandits, which we're gonna use to break Mystery Men. And this will help with the range. So even with this, MMSF is still a range. Or Shady Figure rather. Shady Figure is still a range, which is why you're gonna see me hit it once with the axe here. It's a pretty lightly range though, so you're not gonna miss the range too often. And I believe I get an EI proc there. So when endless items does proc, you get a kind of a glint beside your character when you use the item. And like I said, we're gonna try to, we want to see EI procs throughout this run, so we can avoid having to pick up extra soulstones later. So now we're gonna go to Noble Court. The reason why we come to Noble Court now is because we want to get some extra JP and 8 levels before we do the next boss, which is Matthias. And also because to get to Ophelia's Chapter 4 town, which is Whisper Mill, the closest place is Noble Court. So what we do here is that once we finish with Primrose's Chapter 3 and we are still in Noble Court, we can run to Whisper Mill from there. So in this menu, I teach everyone Hale and Hardy. And like I said, Hale and Hardy is going to give everyone extra HP to live attacks. And you want to do it before Albus because he deals a lot of damage. And what the extra HP does, along with the Nourishing Nut on Tressa, is that it allows everyone to survive an attack from Albus. Because he's going to hit someone on the first turn, and the HP allows everyone to survive that attack, even if it crits. So crits deal 1.25 times the normal amount of damage. I believe Tressa's at the lowest HP here, and Tressa, with the Nourishing Nut, without the Nourishing Nut, she will not live a crit, but with the Nourishing Nut, she does. So this is one of the fights that it does matter, and obviously for the next fight as well. So one thing about this type of dungeons, Mans type dungeons, is that even though you go into the next screen, it doesn't reload your step counter. So that's why I have to do a save and quit here. And again, taking advantage of the fact that we have an autosave every time we enter a new screen. So even though it doesn't reset the step counter, it still does give you an autosave, so you can just use that as kind of like a save point. And you saw that I actually went back into the first screen. And that's just kind of a minor thing I do because this next screen here is a bit risky. I have to pick up this item and then go to the boss. So by going back into the first screen before I do the save and quit, it means that I spawn in this screen, so I have to take fewer steps on the way. So like I said, this screen is a bit risky, so unfortunately I did run into an encounter here, which is very unfortunate. Luckily, I do have quite a bit of HP on my characters, and monsters were nice enough to not, I think, stampede me, which is a very strong AoE attack. Actually run out of SP here with Ophi, but no big deal. I have enough HP on everyone to survive Albus's crit attack. Haunted is the only one that doesn't have, like, Haunted has Heal and Hardy, but doesn't have like any other HP stuff like the Nourishing Nut or Empowering Bracelet. But she does have the benefit of the armor, so she will always lift the attack. So this Albus fight is pretty cool. So what we do here is that we actually use veterans to break him because he's weak to sword. And then we use Lion Dance, which is one of Primrose's skills. It buffs Hanet's attack by 1.5 times, which is going to allow her to deal just enough damage with amputation to kill Albus here. So unfortunately, I do lose quite a bit of time here just because I got the encounter. But now that we are done with Primrose's Chapter 3 and we are at the entrance of Noble Court, we can conveniently run over to Whisper Mill to do Ophelia Chapter 4. So again, the reason why we do Ophelia Chapter 4 is to rush the JP that we can get from Matthias, and because we cannot collect Matthias anyway, so we put him earlier on so we can take advantage of his JP to get Snatch for the later bosses. The screen here, it's too long to make it across without getting an encounter, so we will always take this encounter. The good thing is that these drakes, it's always the same encounter, so it's easy to plan for them, and these drakes like to lower your stats, so they don't really do anything most of the time. And then they are weak to bow and have only 2 shields, so Aerostorm here is able to break them very easily. So that's exactly what I do. I just break them and then I run. And over in Whisper Mill, we're gonna go to the shop. We're gonna want to get one Healing Grape M if you don't have it, because you're gonna want it for one of the fights later. And then you're also gonna get 11 Herbs of Clamor, which is an item that heals silence. So one of the fights later, your characters are gonna get silenced, so you need the Herb of Clamor to heal that off. And this is the most convenient place to buy the Herbs of Clamor because you're already in the shop to sell stuff anyway, because you're gonna need money for Matthias. So the HP setup allows everyone to survive Matthias' spell. So on the first turn, he does a normal attack and then a spell known as Consuming Darkness. So the HP on everyone allows them to survive Consuming Darkness. And then what Consuming Darkness does is it actually puts everyone into cover range, so under 30% HP. So if Matthias were to attack them again, Hanet, who has cover, and also Ophelia, so we give 2 characters cover here. So if one of the cover characters were to be put into red with Consuming Darkness, the other cover character could protect them. So everyone's set up in a way that they always survive Consuming Darkness with under 30% HP so that they can be protected by cover. So what you're really hoping to not see is Matthias to normal attack into someone first and then Consuming Darkness the same person. So that's the only risk in this in that upcoming fight. Before you do face Matthias though, he sicks a bunch of minions on you, so you have to kill them first. So this fight is pretty simple. You just break them with mercs. You don't want them to use the soulstone here, which is a strong AoE attack. Fortunately though, even if you do die in this fight, you do have a save before that, so you don't lose like a lot of time. And then we just use one of the skills we learned last stand. We only learned last stand for this fight actually. It saves an M-stone. But since we need 3 apothecary skills anyway to learn Hale and Hardy, we might as well do that. Alright, so he uses Consuming Darkness first, which is really good. That means that this fight is guaranteed now. And now we use like large pomegranates. So large pomegranates give everyone, give your characters 4 BP, so they are really strong. And cover actually did come into play there, so that's why you can, that's the reason why we give cover to characters. So yeah, with the power of veterans, Matthias goes down in 3 turns. So Matthias is one of the faster Chapter 4 bosses that we can kill, because we don't need to collect Matthias, so we don't need to extend the fight just to collect him. A lot of the later fights though, because we can collect from them, the fights are going to be longer, because the amount of money that we can collect off of them saves a lot more time than the time it takes to extend the fight. Or rather, the time it saves is more than... Yeah, the time it takes to extend the fight. The time that we save from not having to get extra money by collecting these bosses is more than the time it takes to extend the fight to collect them. There we go. So we're done with Ophi's story here. This is a mandatory thing that you have to do. You have to guide Liana to the top of this hill just to complete her story. And now we go to Everhold. So we are going to rush a second Chapter 4 boss, and this is also a boss that you cannot collect. So we don't have enough JP. We actually do have enough JP. We do have enough JP now for Snatch. And that's the reason why we did Matthias first, right? Because we want Snatch for this fight. So there are 2 phases to this fight. The first fight you can collect and steal from. The second you can't. So I'm going to do this menu here. In this menu I give Haunted EI because she's going to be using quite a few items from now. I'm going to give her 1000 Spears because you're going to need 1000 Spears for later. And the free warrior skills also unlocks Summon Strength, which gives her additional attack. And this extra attack is actually going to be relevant. Then we give both our merchants Snatch and then Ophelia Snatch as well. So this actually is going to matter on Ophelia, even though she's not going to be collecting, because she's going to be stealing items from 2 bosses in this run. And the items that we steal, the extra items that we get from Snatch actually do matter. I also give Primrose the Fleetfoot ability, which is a support skill that gives her extra speed. So speed influences how early your characters tend to act. And we give it specifically for this upcoming fight because this upcoming fight against Simeon, it has 2 phases like I mentioned. The first phase is pretty risky because the Simeon has 2 ads, 2 puppets, and everyone in the party dies to an attack into Sweep, which is an AoE skill. So if we have Prim before both of the puppets on turn 2, it's a lot safer because we can use Prim to heal up or increase our defense so everyone can survive. So what I did there was I actually got the money and then I warped back to Everhold. This is to prevent an encounter as well as give me access to the shop. So the first time we're in Everhold, we're actually pretty far away from the shop. So it makes more sense to go to the shop once the second time we're in Everhold because we're right at the entrance. And we need the money because otherwise we do not have enough resources. We do not have enough money for the upcoming fight. Again, because the upcoming fight has 2 phases, we have to use a lot of veterans. I believe we have to use 5 veterans, so 3 for the second phase and 2 for the first phase. And the reason why we do Simeon, we rush Simeon right after Matthias is because this chapter gives us a lot of soulstones, which we are going to need for the upcoming chapters. Specifically, Hanet's chapters require a lot of soulstones because, like I mentioned, in Provokes you can only use monsters and items, and as you might have guessed, soulstones are a lot stronger than monsters, so that's the main damage. That's the main thing we're gonna do to deal damage in those Provokes. And the thing about Hanet's Provokes is that a lot of them require specific soulstones to hit their weaknesses. So, in particular, like Shadow Soulstones and Fire Soulstones, and they're very scarce in this game. But the good thing is that we can steal Shadow Soulstones from Simeon here, and then Fire Soulstone we can get in Prim's Chapter 4. So that's the reason why we do Simeon first. It's just to get the specific soulstones for Hanet's chapters. So like I said, this fight is a bit risky because if the Dancer Marionette uses attack into a person and then the male puppet sweeps, it can kill someone. So the only person that survives this is Hanet because she has a lot of armor. But because Prim went before the puppets on the second turn, I could actually use Mercs to increase the defense so everyone could live there. So that was really nice. So this fight is really cool. The damage is calculated to put Simeon at just low enough HP that we can collect and steal from him unboosted. So boosting your collects and steals actually increases the chance. But what also increases the chance is the remaining HP that the boss has. So the lower HP they have, the higher your steal chance. So we put him at just low enough HP that we don't need a boost to steal and collect here. So like you can see the collect is going to be 100%. I boosted the steal with Ophelia there. It's just a menuing trick because it cuts out the defend and flee options. So it takes fewer inputs to steal, go to the thief skills. So that's the harder phase, phase 1. Phase 2 is not very difficult. You just have to keep in mind that Hanet, Tressa, and Primrose all need 1 BP each, and you need to heal the person that Simeon attacks on turn 1. That's all. So I rehabilitate Ophi here because Simeon's gonna silence someone on turn 1 and it cannot be Ophi. So if he silences Ophi, it's extremely bad. So that's why I use Rehabilitate, because Rehabilitate on top of curing status ailments also prevents them. And here Ophi's protected by cover, so I don't have to heal her. You have to heal the person Simeon normal attacks on turn 1 because they're not in cover range, and if he attacks them on turn 2, it can kill them. So here, I believe everyone that needs an extra BP does have an extra BP. If not, if your merchants aren't able to do that, you can also use a Palm S. So you have 2 for this fight, which you can use both of. And if you can't get the required BP by the first 2 turns, you can also do it on one of the turns later. And this fight is basically for the first 2 turns. You just need to give your BP to characters that need them, and then you need to take 2 shields off of Simeon so you can break him on turn 3. And then the rest of the fight from there is pretty free. So after the first break, Simeon is going to silence everyone, so that's why I use the rehab there. And then with the other 2 characters, I use Herb of Clamor. So Ophelia doesn't need to be cured because she's not going to use any skills from now on. So Hanet, Tressa, and Primrose need to use skills. So you need to rehab one of them and then heal the silence off of the other 2. A pretty cool fight here. One of the few fights that in this route aren't like completely scripted. Just because you have to react to who he silences, and you have to pay attention to like the HP and everything. But yeah, that's the hardest section of this run, barring the initial exploration done. So the rest of the fights from here are all pretty free. So now we're back in Stoneguard. After we got the stones from Prim's Chapter 4, now we can do Han's Chapter 2. And it's mainly for this guy, right? Nathan's bodyguard. He's weak to fire, so you kind of want fire soulstones for him. Otherwise, you have to use like a lot of extra soulstones. You have to use one extra L stone, which is not worth it, in my opinion. So that's kind of why you do Simeon first. So Hanan has two provokes in this chapter. The first is Nathan's bodyguard, and the second is this tree here. You also kind of want the stones from Prim's Chapter 4 for this. Specifically, you want either a light or a fire soulstone. So I do believe you get a light soulstone from the Forest of Purgation anyway. So you don't need the light soulstone from Prim Chapter 4. It's mainly for the firestone. And let's say if we were to do Simeon after like all of Hanet's chapters, then you would have like a surplus of stones, which is not very efficient when it comes to the route. So it saves more time doing Simeon first and not having to like pick up the extra stones for Hanet's chapters elsewhere. So at this point, our characters are pretty strong. So chapter 2 fights are going to be a breeze. And for chapter 2 boss, Lord of the Forest actually has quite some nice money on him. So we take the chance to collect him as well. We're kind of just finishing up with the chapter 2s here before we proceed on with the final 2 characters that we haven't finished. So now we finally go back to Query Quest to finish Tressa's Chapter 2. And the nice thing about doing this now is that your characters are pretty high level, so even if you do get encounters here on the way to Omar, you have a higher chance of running from them, or even if you fail to escape from them, your characters won't die. Because otherwise you'd have to use like stones to kill them before they kill you. So this outside screen here, you do have a chance to get an encounter. Which I do. But because I was pretty high level, I decided to YOLO flee, which I did get, so that was pretty nice. And on this screen, there is a very important item that you have to get. There's also a Palm M here which you can get, but since I got a few dupes earlier on, I decided to skip it. But this Conscious Stone here, you need to get it because it's only going to be relevant for one fight, but for that fight, it's very important. So, Red Eye, on this Chapter 4 boss, he has an attack that can stun people, which he always uses. And you have both of your merchants are able to dodge that attack, but the remaining 2 characters can't. So, you're gonna need it. You're gonna need the Conscious Stone on one of them, because if 2 characters get stunned, then it's really bad, you just lose. But with the Conscious Stone, you can protect one of them from getting stunned, and even if the other one gets stunned, you can still recover the fight. So this fight here is pretty easy now. If you use like both of your Palm S's on Simeon, you can just do a slightly longer fight. It's still like, yeah, it's still really fast. Doesn't take much longer. If you have a Palm S here, it's just an advantage because if Tressa goes before the ads, you can kill them first. Like I do here. And you can return this fight. So it's kind of funny you use like Holy Light there to deal just a bit of damage. But it actually does just enough damage to kill Omar. So if you didn't have the Palm S there, you'd just defend with Tressa and then kill on turn 3. So we're done with Tressa's Chapter 2. Now we go to Victor's Hollow to start her Chapter 3. It's also going to be similar to a lot of the other chapters. After purchasing this item on the second screen, you're going to have to go back to the first screen. So we go over to Still Snow, which is actually just right beside Victor's Hollow. And now we're going to do Hanet's Chapter 3. So Hanet's Chapter 3 is where you're going to need a lot of Shadow Soulstones for, because one of the provokes, or the provoke that you have to do in this chapter rather, like he's only weak to Shadow. So this is where you need to save your Shadow L's and your Shadow M's for. You're going to need 2 Shadow M's and 1 Shadow L for this fight. Fortunately, if you use like all your Shadow M's, previously, you can get like backup ones. So you can get one here and then 1 extra one in Stoneguard after Hanet's Chapter 2. So you use 2 Shadow M's to break him, and then 1 Shadow L. I get a dupe on the Shadow M, which is not really useful. So he has an attack called Panic Slash here, which can confuse you. Fortunately, you have a lot of armor and HP, so you don't die even if you lose a bunch of turns. It's just like time loss. So I think at this point I have quite a few EI procs already, so I might be able to skip some of the stones later. Essentially, you do need 1 EI proc before this chapter. And then you're gonna need a total of 4 before Esmeralda. And I believe you throw like 12 soulstones, so on average you're gonna get 3. So getting 4 is not too unreasonable. And it doesn't cost that much time even if you do have to get backup stones. But the time save does not, it does help. So I skipped the encounter outside, which is very nice because the encounter outside is pretty likely because the screen is very long, and to break it, it usually takes quite a bit of time. So for this fight, you just have to pay attention to who you palm M. You want to palm M the first merchant on the second turn, so that the second merchant can palm M that merchant again. And this is where we start to see Snatch really putting a lot of work, because all the bosses from here can be collected, and Snatch is gonna give us a lot of extra money. So chapter 3 bosses usually have around 16 to 18,000, 16,000 leaves. Dragon here has 18,000, so he has the most out of all the chapter 3 bosses. So we're able to get twice that amount of money. And then chapter 4 bosses have 30,000 leaves for those who can collect. So by having Snatch, we can collect an extra 60,000 between Esmeralda and Red Eye. So that's Hannes Chapter 3. Now we can go back to Victor's Hollow to do Tressa's Chapter 2. A nice fat gold there, just because I didn't get the encounter outside. So there's a Palm M here, which you can purchase if you don't have enough Palm M's. You're gonna need a few for the upcoming fights. But because I got some procs earlier on, I didn't need to purchase it. Or I might have purchased it after Venom Tooth. But we'll have to see. So we do the save and quit here because the screen is very long, And you have to get this 15,000 leaf chest here, which kind of makes the screen pretty risky, but it's such a convenient source of money that it's always worth it to take this risk, even though it sucks. Because if you didn't get this money, you have to like spend a lot more time getting that required money for the upcoming bosses. So fortunately, I didn't get the encounter there. And I believe my PB did get the encounter, so I'm gonna save a lot of time here as well. So if you have a fire or light soulstone, you can use it with Prim here to guarantee that you can take one shield off of Tiger here, because soulstones don't miss. Otherwise, you have to spear or bow with Prim, which, because Tiger has pretty high evasion, sometimes you do run the risk of missing. So fortunately, I didn't miss there. So this is kind of a funny fight. Like, this is the only fight I think in any route or whatever that uses vets times 2. And it's just because amputation does so much damage that you can just... You don't need to max boost both of your vets. You can though, and if you max boost both of your vets, you don't have to use any... you don't have to use amputation. But you need one extra Pom M for this fight. So honestly, I don't know which is better. I just chose to save the Pom M. Because you have to take some time to purchase the Pom M anyway, the extra Pom M. So I don't get it. You can purchase it from the lady outside the orphanage there. Yeah, that means I have enough M's to Pom M's at this point. So you're gonna need minimum 1 for Esmeralda and minimum 2 for Red Eye. So the final 2 chapters, I'm gonna do Esmeralda first. So the thing about these categories is that you can only end with the character that you started with, so that's why we have to do Red Eye last. And there's a good reason why you want to do Red Eye last, or why you want to start with Hanet, aside from the fact that she gives you evasive maneuvers very quickly. Because Tressa can also give you evasive maneuvers pretty quickly, but Hanet is a superior option because you get more benefit out of doing Esmeralda not last than Red Eye. Or rather, you do Red Eye last because he doesn't give you a lot of benefit from killing him anyway. And the main reason for that is because Esmeralda has a drop known as the Rune Knife, which sells for a lot of money, and you can also steal this item off of her. So with Snatch you can steal 2, and that gives you a lot of money. So that's really good for the money route, and precisely the reason why you don't do Esmeralda last. So by that virtue, you don't want to start with Tressa. So in that menu I took off all the HP items and whatever because I wanted to sell them for money. You don't need the HP now anyway. I also give the Conscious Stone to Hanet since we're in the menu, even though we don't need it for Esmeralda. And the jobs menu is where things is where we have to do some pretty important things. So the first thing we did was teach Hang Tough to everyone. This is a merchant support skill. And what Hang Tough does is that if you were above 30% HP, any attack that will kill you would only leave would leave you with just 1 HP. So this is very useful because it gives all of your characters that are very squishy now the ability to survive a lot of attacks. And with cover, you are able to essentially survive all the attacks, or rather, it will protect. Cover and Hang Tough work very nice with each other because if your character is above 30% HP, they will always be protected by Hang Tough, and if they were below 30% HP, they would be protected by Cover. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to take Cover off of Ophi. That's because we need Hanet to absorb some of the attacks in this fight, and if she didn't, if Ophi had Cover, then Hanet she would die in place of Hanet, and we can't have that. You're gonna see why later. So Esmeralda, for their first turn, she does 2 attacks, which everyone can survive because of Hang Tough. And then we're gonna need to Insight with Hanet here, because after the first break, Esmeralda will use this attack called 5 Strikes, which hits 5 random targets. And basically it will kill everyone. But there's a unique property whereby if you use Insight, it actually draws all 5 attacks to Hanet, even if it kills her. So by using Insight, we can protect everyone. And that's the reason why we can't have cover on Ophi, because then the 5 strikes would put her below 30% HP, and then Ophi would absorb the other attacks. So now we revive Hanet. So there are 2 versions of this fight you can do. You can do this version that I'm doing requires fewer palms but 1 Elstone. If you have like a lot of extra palms, you can actually save the Elstone by doing a slightly different fight. But because I have a lot of Elstones at this point, and not enough palms, that's why I'm doing this fight. And here I steal the Rune Knights from Esmeralda, which can be sold for 13,000 leaves a piece. So with Snatch, you get an extra 13,000 out of this fight. Very nice. So now we're done with Tressa's Chapter 4. And can finally do the final chapter, which is Hanet's Chapter 4. And I mentioned that you needed 4 EI procs total before Esmeralda. It's not because you need the stones for Esmeralda, it's because you need 3 stones for Red Eye. And you can get 1 stone in this chapter, so you just need 2 going into this chapter. But again, it is a backup stone, so you can save about 15 seconds from getting it if you have enough stones at this point. So Red Eye, after you break him, after the first break, he does this attack called Bestial Roar, which is an AoE physical attack that has a chance of stunning people. So we gave the merchants a skill known as Sidestep while we were teaching Hang Tough. Sidestep allows them to dodge 1 physical attack. So this protects them from Bestial Roar and subsequently protects them from being stunned, which means that Hanet and Ophi have to tank the attack. So they will always live because of Hang Tough, but it also means that they can get stunned, and that is exactly why we have to pick up the Conscious Stone, because if both of them get stunned, you just lose. But other than that, the fight is free. We reset the step counter to the bottom here, because the screen is very long and you don't want to die here. So actually, if you die here, it puts you like all the way back, I believe, in Grandport, because up to now, you haven't been through any screen transitions. If you travel through different screens via cutscenes, it doesn't do an autosave. So we save and quit here because the screen is very long. You can still get an encounter on the way to Red Eye, which I have gotten many times. I believe my PB also gets an encounter on the way to Red Eye. So you are also 1 in 32 to die in this fight. I believe Esmeralda is 1 in 32 to kill you if Hanet gets hit by attack into Red Blade, or Red Blade into attack. Yeah, Red Blade into attack. Because Red Blade would put her below 30%, whereas normal attack wouldn't. And for this fight, it's the same. If Red Eye rends and then attack into Hanet, then that would kill her. Yeah, but if attack comes out first, you're pretty safe. This fight's pretty free now. Once again, use sidestep with your merchants to protect them. And now we use a healing great bunch here, just in case like both Hanet and Ophi are under 30%, so that they can live with Hang Tough next turn. So Ophi doesn't get stunned here, but if she gets stunned, you can use the Herb of Revival, which we bought in Still Snow. And sometimes you don't have a Pom L for this fight, which is fine. If you use a Pom M here on Prim, it makes Red Eye a very likely, it makes Red Eye a range, but it's a very likely one to hit. But if you have a Pom L, you can guarantee that you always hit the range. So yeah, that's the fight. 4 vets and 3 Elfstones. And with that, that is the run. So the timer will come up on the second cutscene after Red Eye. So yeah, there we go. That was the run. 141 was a pretty good time. I would say sub 140 is probably possible, but yeah, it's gonna take a pretty good run to do that. I might do it in the future, but probably not for now. Yeah, that's the end of the run. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if you are a runner, I hope you found this video helpful, and that you are at least a little more inspired to pick up this category. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for my next half game commentary.